If I had realized that I was speaking after the great Posner, I probably would have stayed home, but I'm here, so I will soldier on. I'm very glad to be back here in Kiev. I came with President Clinton about 10 years ago, and given the number of people I saw in the square, some of you had to have been there that day, and it was a wonderful trip that he still talks about. I also came as a student in the late 1970s and toured around here and some of the other Soviet republics, and going around today and seeing the city, I can firmly tell you that democracy looks very good on all of you. There's nothing more central to Americans than freedom of speech and a free media. Our Constitution, the writers, over 200 years ago, before there was 24-hour cable news, before there was social media, before there was the internet, knew in their First Amendment that we needed to protect it because it was central to our democracy. And it has been that way since the beginning. But I was also, in addition to being a journalist, I worked as press secretary to President Clinton and for a lot of politicians. And I have to tell you, their commitment to freedom of speech, and more particularly freedom of the press, is not quite as ingrained as it is in our Constitution. President Clinton used to call me to the Oval Office every morning and slam down the paper and say, "Why do your friends write these things about us, write about me, and what are you going to do about it?" No politician really feels like they're getting a fair shake. It doesn't matter where they are in the world. They think the press is unfair to them. But I'd invite you to look at President Clinton's experience. As many of you know, the most embarrassing details of his personal life were spread across every paper in the world. Political opponents in league with reporters tried to remove him from office. And this was the president who was in charge of the most powerful military in the world, and never once, except in random late-night thoughts, was there ever a thought that we try to censor the press or filter or shut down, censor what the people wanted to say, whether it was right or whether it was wrong. And even after 200 years, we still struggle with this. This isn't something that's settled in America. In the aftermath of the 9/11 attacks on the World Trade Center, we've had a very healthy and at times heated debate in our country about the right of government to intrude on people's conversations, whether they could listen to their phone calls, whether we could impose on the media the kind of limitations that are really an anathema in America. I'll give you two recent examples, though, to why I think the tradition of free press still holds in America. A couple of months ago, a unknown preacher from the state of Florida decided that he was going to commemorate the 9/11 anniversary by burning a Koran. And the press, I think, in a way that was very irresponsible, gave him lots of coverage. And all of a sudden, it was a worldwide story, and it was something that could potentially undermine America's position in the world and probably cause riots throughout the Muslim world. This was something that was life or death. And never once did the U.S. government try to impose on this gentleman's right to do that. He was convinced by certain parties not to do it, but he was not compelled by the U.S. government. Everyone, I think, recently has read about the so-called WikiLeaks, where 250,000 pages or documents of very sensitive information that not only embarrasses America and many of our allies and some of our adversaries, but also makes it harder for America to conduct foreign policy. While we may be embarrassed, while we may be mad, except for the one gentleman who leaked the information, who gave it to an outside source, who's a member of our military, that's the only person who will be punished. And it tells you something about our commitment. So you do have to excuse me if I sound a little bit like I'm preaching or an evangelist for this, but it is something very important to all Americans. The story here, at least from America's perspective, is a mixed one, and it's very similar to emerging democracies around the world. It's 2 steps forward, 1 step back, but it is a commitment that has to be made firmly for it to work, because you can't have democracy without freedom of speech, freedom of expression, and a free press. They just don't go together. You can't do it. I think there are some things you can do here, and I'll tick through some of them, and I'm going to try to get done before that bell rings so I can say I'm the only one. Absolutely, first and foremost, reporters and journalists need to be protected. They need to be able to be wrong or to be right without threat of harassment, injury, punishment, imprisonment, or worse. Second, I believe you do need an independent media. Not a state-run media, but a state-funded media that's independent. I would look at the BBC in the UK as a great example. It's run by independent people. See, I didn't do it. Independent people. But it's funded by the state, but it's not run by the ruling party. Third, journalists themselves need to have standards. In order to be trusted and be part of this process and a true participant in democracy, they have to have standards. Fourth, there has to be transparency. There's no reason in the world why anyone in this room can't own a media property, can't run a media property, as long as people know who you are and what your biases are and what you bring to the table. Finally, and most importantly, it comes down to the public. This is something that you have to want, you have to need, you have to demand of the politicians, of the media. It's a long process, and even after 250 years in America, we're still working at it. But I can tell you from our experiences, it's definitely worth it. Thank you.